The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days, and neither had my tears. My baby's tiny coffin sat at the front of the church, a white box far too small for the love I had for him. My hands clutched the edges of my black dress, nails digging into my palms just to keep from collapsing on the spot. People filled the seats around me, neighbors, a few kind friends from work, strangers who had known him only in passing. But the two faces I needed most were missing. My mother and my sister Claire sat in the front row, yes, but not as mourners, not as family. They sat stiffly whispering to each other, looking at their watches like they had somewhere better to be. I stood to speak, my voice trembling as I tried to talk about his laugh, his smell, how his little hands used to grip my finger so tightly it felt like we were the only two people in the world. My words broke apart, my heart tearing with them, and still, when I sat down shaking, my mother leaned close enough for me to hear her say, "At least you have one less burden now." Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then, Claire giggled softly and my mother pulled her umbrella closer to herself, not offering to cover me as rain started to pour on the gravesite. I turned to look at her, searching for any trace of love, any sign that losing her grandchild meant anything at all. But all I saw was a cold, flat stare, the same one she had given me my whole life whenever I cried. After the burial, I went home alone. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. I sat on the nursery floor, clutching his favorite blanket, rocking back and forth, whispering his name, praying for this pain to stop just for a moment. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. I reached for it, desperate for someone to say they cared, that I wasn't as alone as I felt. It was a photo from Claire, smiling brightly in front of a brand new house. A sold sign gleamed beside her. The caption read, "Mom says I deserve this. Fresh start, finally." My chest burned as if someone had lit a fire under my ribs. On the day we buried my son, my mother bought Claire a house. A house. Something I had begged for years ago when I was struggling, when I was raising my child alone and barely keeping the lights on. My mother's words rang in my ears. One less burden. That's what she thought of my baby's life. That's what she thought of me. Just weight she didn't want to carry, a mistake she wished she could erase. I called her, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She answered on the second ring, cheerful, like the funeral never happened. "Yes, honey. Did you see Claire's house? Isn't it beautiful?" My voice cracked. "You bought her a house today? After what you said? After you called my baby a burden?" She sighed, bored already. "You're being dramatic again. Claire deserves nice things. She's the one who's always made me proud. I can't waste money on pity gestures for you. Stop sulking and congratulate your sister." Claire's laughter echoed through the phone in the background. My own sister, who hadn't shed a tear that day, was celebrating while I sat on my kitchen floor holding a blanket that would never wrap around my child again. I ended the call before they could hear me break. That night, I sat in the nursery until the moon moved across the window. My grief was so heavy I could barely breathe, but beneath it, something colder, sharper, began to grow. It wasn't rage, not yet. It wasn't hate. It was a promise I made to my son, to myself, to the girl I used to be who spent years begging for scraps of love from people who only ever gave cruelty. They had stripped me of my child, stripped me of dignity, stripped me of comfort, of family, of hope, but they hadn't stripped me of my resolve. I kissed my baby's blanket one last time, my tears soaking into the fabric, and whispered into the quiet, "They chose her comfort over your memory. They think they can live in warmth after leaving me in the cold. I swear to you, my love, one day they'll know what it feels like to lose everything they thought was safe. I'll make sure their comfort rots beneath them until all they have left is the emptiness they gave me." The house was dark. The grief was endless, but for the first time that day, I felt a flicker of control. A plan I couldn't yet name began to form, slow and certain. I didn't know how long it would take, but I would not rest until they understood what they had done. Until the day came when my mother and sister sat in their perfect home, surrounded by silence, and finally felt what it's like to lose something that can never be replaced. The days blurred together after the funeral, each one heavy and suffocating. My grief clung to me like a second skin, but beneath it, the betrayal dug deeper. Losing my baby was unbearable enough, but watching my own mother and sister dismiss his life, mock my pain, and celebrate a house while I buried my son, that betrayal hollowed me out until there was nothing left but a cold promise. They would never again sleep soundly in a home bought from my suffering. At first, I went silent. I ignored their calls, their fake apologies, their attempts to act like nothing had happened. Every time my phone lit up with Mom or Claire, I remembered the graveside rain, my mother's voice saying one less burden, and the message of Claire grinning in front of her new house. I couldn't bring myself to respond. They didn't deserve my words. They didn't deserve any piece of me. But silence wasn't enough. They'd walked away from my pain like it was nothing. I wanted them to understand what it felt like when the ground you stood on gave way, when everything you thought was yours, your comfort, your home, your safety, vanished, leaving you with nothing but the weight of your own choices. I drove past their new house one evening. It was everything they wanted and everything I had begged for years ago when I was struggling to raise my child. Warm light glowed in every window. Laughter drifted out from inside, their perfect little life shining like a prize they hadn't earned. I sat in my car across the street, staring at it, my hands gripping the steering wheel, a single thought pounding in my head. This house was bought with my heartbreak. It shouldn't be a home. It should feel like the graveyard they left me in. I began leaving reminders. Small things, subtle but undeniable. A single white rose on the porch every week, the same flowers from my baby's funeral, a wind-up music box on their front step one morning that played a faint lullaby when opened, a blank envelope containing only a folded piece of fabric, a piece of a baby blanket identical to the one I held in the nursery every night. At first, they probably thought it was coincidence, but as weeks passed, my gifts came more frequently, each one harder to ignore. Notes appeared on their doorstep, handwritten in black ink, never signed. One less burden, isn't that what you said? Do you still think she deserved the house? Does comfort feel the same when it's built on a grave? I imagined Claire's hands shaking as she read them, my mother's forced bravado cracking just a little more each time. They were living in their prize home, but I was turning it into something else, a mirror of what they had done to me, a place where the air tasted of guilt and every corner whispered loss. Soon, I noticed changes. Curtains that once stayed open were always drawn. Lights stayed on late into the night. I saw my mother outside once, pacing the porch, glancing over her shoulder as if the weight of her own words were following her. The neighbors started to notice too. Whispers spread about strange happenings around the house, about the way my mother and sister flinched every time a car slowed down outside. The beautiful new home became a source of unease. People avoided visiting, and what was once Claire's dream house slowly became their cage. But I wasn't done. They had left me standing in the rain, watching my baby lowered into the ground, stripped of every ounce of comfort and love I thought I had. This house they thought was a gift? I was going to make it haunt them until the day they couldn't stand to live in it anymore, until every wall reminded them of what they had said and done, until the warmth they stole turned to ice in their own bones. For months, I planned the final stage. Not noise, not exposure, but a silence so heavy it would crush them. A silence that would make their dream home feel like the grave they had abandoned. And when the time came, they would finally know what it felt like to lose everything they thought was safe. 1 year after my baby's funeral, their house looked nothing like the dream home they had celebrated. The paint was still fresh, the lawn still perfectly cut, but the air around it felt different now. Heavy, tense, like the house itself knew it was built on cruelty. They had locked themselves inside, blinds closed, laughter long gone, but I wasn't finished. My grief had no end, so neither would their comfort. I waited until the anniversary of my son's death, the day that still made my body shake when I woke up. I drove to their neighborhood early, watching from a distance, as morning light spilled over their porch. A delivery truck came and went. Later, Claire stepped out briefly to grab a package, her face pale, hair unkempt, no makeup, no smile. My once perfect sister was unraveling, and I intended to pull every last thread. That evening, while the sun sank and rain clouds gathered, just like the day of the funeral, I made my final move. I left a small box on their porch. Inside was a candle, the same kind the church had burned at my baby's funeral, and a note with 4 words. "Home isn't yours forever." Not long after, I heard shouting from inside. The kind of shouting fueled by panic, by fear you can't explain away. My mother ran to the door, scanned the street, clutching the note in her hand, eyes darting around like she was being hunted. And in a way, she was. Not by me, but by the weight of her own actions. Days later, they tried to sell the house. Twice. Each time, a new prospective buyer pulled out at the last minute. I knew why. I'd made sure word had spread in whispers across the neighborhood. Stories about a cursed house, about a family who bought comfort with betrayal, about a baby's funeral where love never showed up. Nobody wanted to live in walls soaked with that kind of story. Weeks passed. They stopped leaving the house except for groceries. Mom lost her standing in her social clubs. No one would meet her eyes anymore. Claire, once the golden child, couldn't hold on to friends or jobs. Their dream house had become a tomb of guilt, isolating them from everyone they thought would always be on their side. And then, on a stormy night almost identical to the one when I buried my son, I walked up to the edge of their driveway. I didn't knock. I didn't leave anything behind. I just stood there under the rain, looking at the house, at the dark windows where 2 people sat alone inside the comfort they had stolen. For a moment, I wondered if they even remembered why they felt so empty now, if they ever replayed my mother's words, "one less burden," and felt sick the way I did. If Claire still thought she deserved her fresh start after stepping over my grief to get it. I wanted to see their faces, to look them in the eye and make them say it again, make them admit they thought my child's life meant nothing. But I didn't need to. The silence of that house told me everything. They weren't living. They were surviving in a shell that had once been a symbol of victory. Their comfort had rotted from the inside out. They had a roof, walls, money, but no peace, no pride, no family left to fill the space. I had given them exactly what they gave me the day of my baby's funeral. An empty place where love should have been. I left one last note in their mailbox before I walked away forever. "You called my baby a burden. You bought comfort with his memory. Now you know what it feels like to own nothing that truly matters." I never went back, but from that day on, I heard whispers about how my mother and Claire stayed locked away in that house, afraid of the world, afraid of the guilt that clung to their skin, unable to sell the very comfort they had stolen. And I finally understood revenge didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's a silence that never lets them rest, a haunting that makes every day feel like a funeral for the love they chose to destroy. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.